And we're live on Twitch and YouTube. Let's start out with a little fast action network. Oh, it's a YouTube one. For Hellman's. It's going to be a tough one today. Jake Lagatar's got Jake Lagatar's got puppies on the other side, so it's a tough one for me today. Wow, one day ago, 141 views. Kind of would have expected more from Hellman's. And now I guess pretty much just mayonnaise adverts on here, eh? Oh, some of these have a lot of views.
I was born in...
The comments do. There we go, one in the bag. We're not got anything else added on here. There's not been that much new on fast action for a minute. Just made a little post glazing Aiden Kenkyoku earlier, whose blog we read at Sandcastles. See if there's anything new on there actually. We're going to watch one or two talks on effective animal advocacy. We'll check out if there's anything new for us here first. This guy writes some very, very long posts, but I've enjoyed them. Alright, we got one on YouTube, one on Twitch. I always seem to have one on Twitch. I don't know who my one Twitch viewer is, but you know, I appreciate you. At the moment, you're keeping my restream subscription going. Let's get into this. This is Leah Edgerton talking at Effective Altruism Global San Francisco 2019. Strategic Considerations for Effective Animal Advocacy. Let's go.
Now, our next speaker, Strategic Considerations in Effective Animal Advocacy. Our speaker is Leah Edgerton. Leah is the Executive Director of Animal Charity Evaluators, and she spent 2 years in the past at Pro-Veg International, where she built up the organization's connections in China and collaborated with academics on experimental research aimed at reducing meat consumption. Thank you.
I would like to start out today with a thought.
It's a little bit quiet, eh? Is it alright? Oh, maybe it's not too bad.
Experiment. Imagine, several years from now, that effective altruism has become mainstream. What changes would we expect to see? Would maybe late night sport broadcasts, instead of showing football matches, maybe they'd be showing prediction tournaments instead? Maybe hipsters, instead of wearing those faded Ramones t-shirts, they'd be walking around with faded Peter Singer t-shirts instead?
Based, where can I acquire this merch? This is young Peter Singer. Look at that tash.
T-shirts instead? More seriously though, how would we want the characteristics of our movement to change? Thinking on the margin is a very different exercise when we're asking ourselves how to best spend less than 1% of a movement's funding, compared to when we're thinking about how to best spend 10, 20, or say 30% of a movement's funding. This might seem like a fun thought experiment and just a fun exercise, but it's actually become somewhat of a reality for those of us working in the animal advocacy cause area. Perhaps the most striking
Hey, Tristan, good to see you. What's good?
metric by which to track this change is by looking at the amount of funding that EAs have influenced within the farmed animal advocacy cause area. So let's go back in time to 2014. ACE, to my knowledge, was the only organization influencing, EA organization influencing.
Anyone who's here, you have a lot of appreciation from me because Jake Lecatar's showing off his puppies on the other channel. So, you know. To those of you preferring the slideshow, fair play.
Funding within the animal advocacy cause area, and we tracked just under $150,000 moved to our top charities that year, which my best calculation puts our impact around something like 0.0015 to 0.003% of the movement's funding, so pretty small. Fast forward to 2018, and we see a very different picture. The combined efforts of animal charity evaluators, Open Philanthropy Project, and the Center for Effective Altruism's Animal Welfare Fund influenced about $40 million in funding last year within the farm animal advocacy cause area. Just as a fun aside, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation around how much funding EAs influence within global health and development, and my calculation came out about 0.01% of the movement's funding that we influence within the total humanitarian budget. And that number's from 2017. As we explore the question of how to think about impact in a cause area where EAs have a lot of influence, where we are mainstream.
Wait, sorry, was the 25%? Wow, okay. That's of the total farmed animal advocacy budget, which is influenced by effective altruism. I see, okay. So this is 2014. It's like a fraction of a percent. And then what was it more? 2018 up to 25. Wow, okay, that's crazy. I guess there's a much smaller pie to take a slice out of. And presumably this is even bigger now. So there's the humanitarian one. That's the global health budget influenced by effective altruism, and it's still a fraction of 1%. Okay, yeah, out of 27.3 billion, so it's a much, much larger pie. Although honestly, I would have thought that difference would be bigger, given that our budget is 0.3 billion.
Within the total humanitarian budget. And that number's from 2017. As we explore the question of how to think about impact in a cause area where EAs have a lot of influence, where we are mainstream, it's also important to acknowledge another reality of advocacy within animal cause areas, and that is the lack of evidence available to inform our work. There are very few studies that exist on any intervention commonly used within animal advocacy, and the few that do exist are often lacking in a control group, which means that it's very difficult to infer causality. In other cases, they might be underfunded and hence underpowered, which means that we're unable to detect the types of effect that we're looking for. And more fundamentally, the types of effect that we're looking for are just particularly difficult to measure. And those include dietary change, attitude change, and systems change. In my talk today, I'd like to talk through the question that we started with. What do we do as effective altruists when we're working in a cause area where we have a small amount of evidence that we're working with, and in a cause area in which we have a large amount of influence? I'd like to walk you through ACE's answer to that question. On the one hand, we seek to increase the amount of evidence available to inform our strategic decision making. And simultaneously, we seek to prioritize the effectiveness of our movement on a movement level, in addition to considering individual interventions and individual organizations that are particularly promising. So let's dig in. Much of our work at ACE is focused on building a base of evidence that animal advocates can use to make better decisions. Our own research team conducts experimental research. We also do literature reviews that are aimed at answering some of the most fundamental and highly important questions that advocates are facing. In 2016, we also launched the Animal Advocacy Research Fund, which to date has funded 37 studies.
The double MacBook is quite a flex, right? Not one MacBook, but two.
Those are mostly focused on intervention research, foundational research, and movement growth. On our website, we host a collaboration directory, which is kind of a matchmaking service between animal advocates who have research questions and researchers who have the skills to help answer them. We host a data repository on the Open Science Framework, which is a repository where researchers can upload the raw data from all their studies transparently for anyone to use. In fact, we actually require that our research fund recipients share their data transparently in some way as well. We also host a research library on our website, which does bring together the few studies that already exist, so the animal advocates have a resource to go to when they're looking for evidence to inform their strategy. We've also hosted a couple of events,
Hey, Soy Daddy. What's good? Nice to see you.
including the
I guess I had a bit of a fail yesterday on the panel live stream that I tried to do. I watched back the live stream recording, and I think there was like less than a minute worth of extremely blurry coverage. So I'm guessing it was just pure buffer during the stream. Yeah, I deleted it now. It wasn't watchable, I guess.
2016 symposium and 2017 research workshop. And our events are aimed at bringing together animal advocates and researchers to share findings and to discuss future research directions. More generally, we're seeking to move beyond the limitations of self-reported dietary data towards more robust data sources. Interestingly, when you ask people to report about their own dietary behavior, people are pretty likely to say, or not pretty likely, but it happens often enough that people would say that they're both vegetarian and that they eat meat in the same survey. So it's unclear whether that's like a difference in definition around what vegetarian is, or if people are just really bad at predicting their own behavior. But in any case, there's a lot of really exciting new studies coming out that are focusing on.
Yeah, I guess so. I noticed someone found, was it you, Soy Daddy, found the link to the actual Festival of Tomorrow page where it was streamed as well. So yeah, you can watch it there, and I guess that was better quality.
On using actual behavior data. Those include using purchasing data from supermarkets and from institutional dining facilities. And I just want to take a minute here to give a shout out to Jacob Peacock from the Community Labs, who wrote a really great paper on the topic. If you'd like to discuss the topic further, I recommend reaching out to him. We're also making efforts to use the full range of evidence available to us. So when we don't have randomized control.
Yeah, the college dining halls is a good data source. That was the one thing in Jacob Peacock's paper where he was like, this is really like the most tractable place to get data. If you can find a dining hall that will collaborate with you and give you that data, which is not a given. I thought that they might be a bit more forthcoming, honestly, but the ones that I've spoken to, it's not necessarily any easier. One thing we've done is get sales data from a data vendor, but it is very expensive to do. We paid about £15,000 for what is essentially a spreadsheet detailing the meat sales in different parts of the UK during a campaign that we ran. But yeah, it's not cheap. It's maybe something to do if there's an expensive campaign going on already. There's a lot of money being spent on the campaign itself, then yeah, it can be a good way to get data.
Control trials, or for questions for which they're not a good, well-suited medium. We also seek to use historical and sociological evidence and case studies. And we also host an interview section on our website where we interview experts from the animal advocacy movement who are approaching the question of reducing animal suffering from different angles. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a well-founded potential critique to using research other than the gold standard of randomized control trials. I think the biggest risk here is opening ourselves up to justifying our own behavior. So if we read the research in a way that makes us feel good about what we're currently doing, that's not really helping us find out the ultimate truth of how to help animals and might just be giving ourselves a pat on the back. And so it's really important to keep that in mind when you're doing qualitative research, that this is the potential bias that we should strive to overcome. I'd also like to point out that the alternative also carries risks as well. When we're talking about only investigating interventions for which it's easy to gather evidence, we might be tempted to overlook interventions that are particularly effective, but maybe the effects are very indirect and therefore difficult to measure, or maybe they take place over a very long period of time, which means that it's really impractical to see the results. So in general, when using research, it's just really important to be aware of the different types of bias that different types of evidence bring with them. To summarize, we think that increasing the amount of evidence available and consulting as full a range of evidence as possible will help us make better decisions about how to reduce animal suffering. So let's check back in with our original question. How should effective altruists think about creating impact in a cause area where we don't have much evidence, but which we have a very large impact? Our approach to answering the second half of that question has been to prioritize the health and hence effectiveness as a movement.
Hey Jason, good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Of the movement as a whole, in addition to promoting individual interventions and organizations that we think are particularly promising. In practice, this has meant allocating resources among more organizations rather than fewer, having lower standards of evidence for approaches that we think are particularly likely to be promising, and having a higher tolerance of risk.
Yeah, there's a bit of discussion yesterday about, how do animal charity evaluators, which is the organization that Leah was working for at this time, how do they actually make judgments about what are the effective organizations and so on. I always find it reassuring when I hear people from ACE talking. They have a very careful approach to evaluating evidence and understand a lot about how to interpret empirical evidence. That's why I kind of think it's unlikely that they're overclaiming. If anything, I think they're probably underclaiming. Like a lot of calculations done in this way and in this space, a norm is to use conservative figures. So if there's like a range of possible money raised by a campaign or animals helped by a campaign, they'll tend to have used the lower end of that range in calculating that amount. So I think, if anything, there's probably a chance that a lot of this is understated. But yeah, they're acknowledging that there's not super strong evidence for a lot of things. And so oftentimes it's a judgment based on the best available evidence, right?
So some of our concrete projects that reflect this line of thinking are our recommended charity fund, which allocates resources not only among our top 3 or 4 charities, but also a smaller percentage among our standout charities, and our newly launched Effective Animal Advocacy Fund. So we launched this fund late last year with the idea of broadening the scope of charities that we support beyond just our top and standout charity designations. So these could include charities with a shorter track record, but a promising approach, or maybe those working in more neglected areas. Last year, our round of funding raised almost $2 million for this fund, and we made our first distribution earlier this year. We distributed grants to 49 recipients who are working in movement building in neglected geographical regions.
Yeah, and then the other thing is spreading resources, given that there's not extremely high confidence in any particular approach over another. Spreading resources across, at the moment they recommend 10 different organizations representing at least half a dozen different strategies for helping animals, which is again something that you would want to see if there's not extremely strong evidence for any particular method or organization. It's like spreading your bets, basically, right?
Movement building in neglected demographic groups, capacity building in general, corporate outreach, policy work, and influencing public opinion. More generally, we've worked to better understand the role that diversity, equity, and inclusion play in capacity building within our movement. We theorize that on a movement level, diversity adds resilience, which will be needed for our movement to be effective over the long term. Reducing animal suffering is a very complex question that spans the entire globe and has fundamental implications on people's attitudes and behaviors, which means it's very unlikely for us to be able to change this on a massive scale in the short term. We think that a broad global movement with a diverse set of actors will be better at overcoming the obstacles that will inevitably arise. So more concretely, these types of movement-level considerations have inspired us to place a higher focus on organizational culture in our charity evaluations, and also to promote the work of those who are seeking to create a more equitable and inclusive movement for advocates of different demographic backgrounds. Tying back to our efforts to increase the base of evidence available that we have to work with, we also see value in working with a broader set of actors, not only because of their direct impact, but also as an investment in the collection of future research, of future evidence. So being in touch with a larger set of organizations lets us learn more about other interventions that we haven't had a lot of contact with before. And in addition, we see value in bringing a larger set of organizations closer to ACE's work and closer to effective altruism principles in general. I'd like to take a moment here in EA spirit to acknowledge a well-founded potential critique to broadening our approach. People might say that broadening our approach, working with people with different attitudes and beliefs, might increase the risk that we face of conflict, of mission drift, and of dissolution and fragmentation. These are real risks, and I think we've already seen some of these playing out in small ways. But I'd also like to challenge you to think about whether these risks are really as scary as they might be, and they might even come with some potential benefits. Conflict, for example, could lead to necessary change. And mission drift could lead us towards a mission that preserves the current strengths of the effective animal advocacy movement while overcoming some of its limitations. And it's possible that fragmentation could lead towards multiple movements that could accomplish more.
Yes, Tristan, that's a great book. I really, really like Tobias Lynn. I'll probably try and talk to him on the channel at some point. I think we're definitely a similar brand of utilitarian in terms of thinking about animal issues. Deeply, deeply pragmatic guy. I've met Tobias. I know Tobias. He's a cool guy. But yeah, How to Create a Vegan World, I really recommend as a book in this area.
More separately than we accomplish with our current movement together. We do think these are really important risks to take seriously, and we think that the way to approach these is through thoughtful and constructive communication. But we think that the value of working with a broad set of actors and developing a resilient global movement outweigh the potential risks of these factors. Over the last 5 years, the introduction of an effective altruism framework has drastically changed the landscape of the animal advocacy movement. Conversations informed by the principles of EA are taking place quite literally on the center stage at our largest conferences. Animal advocates are placing a higher emphasis on intra-movement cause prioritization. They're using more and more evidence to back up their strategic planning. And they're thinking harder and harder about the cost effectiveness of interventions. We see donors who are asking important questions about where their donations can have the most impact and making more strategic allocations of their funding.
Hey, Master Roach, how's it going? Good to see you. Hey, boss man. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining.
We see organizations that have pivoted their focus in order to increase their marginal impact. And we've seen volunteers that are asking important questions about where their time can add the most value to our movement. This growth of influence of EA within the animal advocacy movement is something that we should all be very proud of, and I know that many people in this room worked very hard to make that happen. So thank you very much. To quote a famous thinker of our times, with great power comes great responsibility. Thinking on the margin is now a very different exercise than it used to be. Asking ourselves the question of how we should spend less than 1% of our movement's funding in order to have the greatest impact possible gives us a meaningfully different answer than when we ask ourselves how we should spend 25%. Compound that with the lack of evidence available to support our decision-making, and you can see the importance of proceeding carefully. That's why at ACE, our approach is to focus on increasing the amount of evidence available to inform the decisions that we make, while simultaneously acting in ways that reflect epistemic humility and promote the health and hence effectiveness of our movement over the long term. Thank you.
Looks like we got Q&A in here as well, which you can watch.
And now, Leah, I invite you over to QA land.
Oh, wow.
In this corner. So just a couple of questions here from the audience. One, how do the priorities of the Effective Animal Advocacy Fund differ from those of the EA Animal Welfare Fund?
Yeah, so I think actually it's a fair question, and those do have fairly similar goals. I think what makes the EA fund, the EA's Animal Welfare Fund, slightly different from the ACE Effective Animal Advocacy.
These are the two funds that I would recommend giving to. Animal Charity Evaluators obviously evaluates and recommends the most impactful animal charities. But I think the real play is giving to ACE itself and their recommended charity fund, which is going to update when ACE's evaluations update. Early on, I started to give to some of the top ACE charities. But of course, they do their evaluations, I guess, every year or maybe every 2 years. And so their evaluations change, and it's basically effort to go change your update your direct debits and everything. And you might not feel like you want to as well. You might get attached to giving to particular charities and then think, well, I would feel bad to end that support even if they're no longer an ACE recommended charity. So yeah, I'd recommend giving to ACE directly and their recommended charity fund, then that is dispersed amongst other charities. I actually give to the EA Animal Welfare Fund myself. That's mainly because we used to get grants from ACE at Bryant Research, and they won't give grants if you're also a donor to them, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear Leah's take on what the difference is between the two. I think the answer is that the EA Animal Welfare Fund is more kind of speculative, basically. It's like it's kind of like riskier ventures, whereas ACE is like puts a lot more weight on track record and evidence and so on. The EA Animal Welfare Fund is a bit more like willing to fund some potentially kind of wacky things. Nice, Master Roach, you'll get there, you'll get there. Where are you? Are we in Europe and nearly done with work, or in America and just starting? That sounds interesting.
The fund is like simply who's making the decisions, and I think I would like to see our movement move towards something we talked about in our factory farming meetup, having a more diverse set of funders and a more diverse set of thinkers, so that we're avoiding the groupthink effect, and that we're all making these decisions thoughtfully and carefully based on the different evidence that we all have available. So I think in practice, we have slightly different values over what we think the most neglected areas are, and we have slightly different opinions about certain types of interventions and certain types of foundational questions, but I think, yeah, they actually are fairly similar funds.
Great, thank you. The next question is sort of a multi-stage question. So other than effective donating and research, what concrete advice would you offer to a non-EA animal welfare sympathizer interested in effective citizen advocacy? Or rather, what practical advice can we offer to aspiring animal advocates we come across outside of the EA bubble? And what can we recommend they do tomorrow as well as a year from now?
Damn, that's a really good question. This might actually be a good thing to pay attention to for our Do More pillar of Vegan 2.0. At the moment, it's pretty one track. I'll do the Humane League's Fast Action Network, but I wonder what else can be recommended in terms of activism with an effective altruism lens. Is Leah going to come up with something that's like very high leverage, contacting institutions, like lobbying your MP and stuff like that, maybe she'll say?
Sure. So I think generally there are ways that we can promote certain aspects of effective altruism within the animal advocacy.
Godspeed, Master Roach.
There are ways that we can promote certain aspects of effective altruism within the animal advocacy community that we've seen get a lot of resonance. So that's just basic ideas like measuring our impact and thinking about cause prioritization, narrowing the focus of our programs to where they're actually helping the most animals. I think we've seen organizations and individual advocates think about maybe working in different countries or on different types of interventions when they think about these questions. So that's one way. But I think concretely as well, there's a lot of opportunities within ACE and within our recommended charities for internships, for job opportunities, for supporting as volunteers, for supporting as donors. And I think, yeah, there's a lot to look into there. The 80,000 hours job board is a really great place to start.
Awesome. And I know that there were multiple. Oh, there's another question.
Yeah, she's doing this a few years before Animal Advocacy Careers existed. Animal Advocacy Careers. This is a great organization to get in touch with if you're interested in working in this area. They have a pretty good EA focus. There's a job board here that you can go check out. I'll put the link of this in chat. Yeah, this is a good resource to check out if you are looking at working in the area professionally. Let's see what we've got at the moment in the UK, for example. Actually, I guess we have a lot of Americans in. Let's have a look at America, hey? Community and Research Coordinator at Fauna-Lytics. Thought Leadership and Partnerships Advisor at the Good Food Institute. Tilt Collective, this is a funder of animal things. Independent contractor to provide program and grantee engagement support to strengthen relationships. Postdoc at NYU on the animal welfare program. That's a cool opportunity for someone. Director of Global Philanthropy at the Humane League. That'd be very high impact for somebody. Legacy Giving Advisor. This is the wills thing. We were talking about wills the other day, hey? Mercy for Animals, Good Food Institute, Animal Equality, New Roots Institute. Yeah, a lot of these are Legal Impact for Chickens. A lot of these are effective animal advocacy organizations, like currently or formerly recommended by ACE. So, you know, if you know people, or if you are someone who is looking to work in this area, I definitely recommend Animal Advocacy Careers as a good place to start looking for opportunities, you know. What have we got in the UK? Compassion in World Farming, Senior Communications Manager. Animal Law Foundation. Oh look, this is Edie Bowles, who we were watching the other day. And yes, as I expected, it is rather modest salaries on offer for some of these places. Centre for Effective Altruism, that's a big one. Another animal law foundation. They must be growing. Philanthropy manager at ProVeg. Yeah, some cool opportunities here for somebody. Oh yeah, what kind of thing do you do, Tristan? You don't have to say. Obviously, you don't need to dox yourself. Although I guess you do use your real name and pick. So fair play to you. I respect it.
Question. Okay. How do you think the effective animal advocacy community can be more inclusive or persuasive to the rest of the animal advocacy movement?
Sure. I think I think one thing that's important is to not go in with arrogance and not go in thinking that we have all the answers. As I said in my talk today, the evidence base is really lacking, and we have a lot of uncertainty about these questions. And I think we can go in and say, it's important to be asking these questions, be having these conversations, but I think we also need to be humble and know that, the approaches that we're taking, not go around and say that, the approaches that other people are taking are ineffective simply because.
Oh, that's cool, Tristan. Nice. Hey, this maybe this is some advice I could do with taking, like a little bit more humility and modesty when interacting with non-EA animal advocates. I mean, realistically, I do think that everyone should be aspiring to be effective in their altruism and their advocacy, because what's the alternative, right? Being ineffective or just doing things at random, I guess. But yeah, it's true what she's saying. There's not super strong evidence in a lot of these areas, and so you might rub people up the wrong way if you're saying that there is, or even if there was, like, you don't want to be implying that that people's current advocacy is no good, right? So yeah, this is very good advice that I can do with taking on board myself.
Because the evidence that we have today is inspired us to work on something else. I think it's important to keep an open mind and to keep in mind that conflict and tearing each other down is probably much less effective than the various differences in our different interventions, and to think about the long term and building a movement where we can all have these conversations together and help all of us improve together, and not have any sort of arrogance about what works when in fact these are very, very difficult questions.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
There's a ton of these talks on YouTube, like effective animal advocacy talks, that have fewer than 1,000 views for the most part. So there's a ton of good content for us to interact with here. I'm literally just searching effective animal advocacy and then going through the list. We got one from Lewis Bollard. This is the one we just watched. Aquatic animal advocacy. That's where we're going to get to the shrimp. The role of politics and policy. That's an interesting one. "52 minutes though is kind of long. Probably don't have time to watch that now. How to not fail at building an animal rights organization. That could be a good one. What I'm going to do at some point as well is a bit of an audit of my old videos, my first videos that I made. Oh, look at this. This is an early Chris Bryant, a bit of early Chris Bryant content. 6 years ago. This is long before I was properly making YouTube content. This is of a Vegan Society article that I've read on stream before. We'll definitely watch that sometime. Maybe none now though. You know, I do kind of want to do is read the paper that was the basis of my video called How to Get Someone to Go Vegan. Look at this, I have to log in to read my own paper. We can do it though. This is identifying and overcoming the social and psychological barriers to veganism. This is a bit of a beast. I definitely won't have time to read this all now. I'm not sure if I could do it in one sitting, honestly. There's a lot of good stuff in here, in my humble opinion. Nice, Master Roach. Or I guess not nice if you hate it. Yo, hey Andrew, good to see you. I want to be a maple syrup farmer? That sounds pretty based. Are you in that part of the world? It'd be tough to do that around here. Yeah, this might be a bit long and heavy for now, I'm thinking. Hey, look at this, the whole playlist of effective animal advocacy. Oh, that did not bring that up.
Today, Luke.
Hold your horses. Farm animal welfare and alternative proteins. Expansion of animal advocacy. You know what? Let's watch the Lewis Bollard one. I think that's going to be some good content for now. EA Global San Francisco 2019. This is the same. Is this the same event we were just watching? We've watched Lewis Bollard before. I know he's a good speaker. So many emails. Yeah, same, Master H. It do be like that sometimes. 15 minutes from Canada. Oh, nice. Alright, so it's escape north of the border and become a maple syrup farmer. That's the dream. Good, arguably an animal product alternative if you consider honey, right? Alright, let's see. Do we have anything going on LinkedIn? Hey, this is similar to Fast Action Network. The International Council for Animal Welfare and the Raven Network. There's another thing to Google This only gives you, well, they give you actions by email, which is why I don't tend to do it on stream, but I am signed up for this. Yeah, probably Master H. So this is very similar to Fast Action Network. Last weekend during Sentient Futures Bay Area, I presented 7 steps we took to create a high-impact global network of now more than 40,000 digital activists. Wow. I also shared how we're using AI to create, to execute creative pressure campaigns faster than ever. Missed the talk? I'm working for an animal welfare organisation. Get in touch with me and I'll send the cheat sheet of the 7 steps to create a digital actions network to support your campaigns. Very cool. Wow, is this real? Bhutanese law makes it illegal to kill animals for food within the country's borders, and there are no commercial abattoirs. However, the Livestock Bill 2025 has sparked recent debate, with some officials suggesting the establishment of regulated domestic slaughtering facilities to address hygiene concerns with imported meat and support local nutrition, a proposal that's faced strong opposition from animal welfare advocates and the head of the monastic body. Damn. Bhutan. I've heard, I think Bhutan's pretty woke. Fuck me, that's what it looks like, eh? Looks like AI. Is this AI Bhutan? Less than 1 million population. A Buddhist kingdom on the Himalayas eastern edge. Well, that's pretty based. I love Bhutan, but it's sadly virtue signaling, similar to what happens in India, where cows get sent to slaughter miles away and increase. Interesting. Okay, so they have animal farming, just no slaughterhouses, but then they're still exporting live animals, using that as an opportunity to create in-country house slaughterhouses rather than just saying no slaughtered meat. Huh. Right. Yeah, they don't have no meat. Right. I thought that seemed a bit too good to be true. There is that one town in India, I always forget the name. Which does have no sale of palatana. Which does have no sale of meat. World's first city to outlaw non-vegetarian food. Followed a protest by about 200 Jain monks, demanding the closure of about 250 butcher shops. Wow, more than one butcher shop per person. So that's pretty cool. Palatana, let's have a look at this. Also looks pretty banging, look at that. Yeah, all of these kind of vegan haven places seem to be in a similar part of the world. I guess it's Buddhism and Hinduism. These are the wokest religions with respect to animal rights, huh? Very cool, very cool. Well, let's see what Lewis Bollard's saying. Very wise guy, so I'm sure we can learn something here.
I think it's just after 2:30, so we'll kick off. It's my real pleasure this afternoon to introduce Lewis Boulevard, who's going to be talking to us about the lessons learned in farm animal welfare. I'm sure Lewis needs no introduction, but he leads the Open Philanthropy Project strategy for farm animal welfare. So before joining Open Phil, he worked as the policy advisor and international liaison to the CEO at the Humane League of the United States. Prior to that, he was a litigation fellow at the Humane Society and an associate consultant at Bain & Company. He has a BA in social studies from Harvard University and a JD from Yale Law School. So if you'd like...
That's how you can tell this guy's a smart dude, by the way. Bain is one of the big consulting companies that's like, you know, people will write ex-Bain on their LinkedIn because it's a flex to have worked there. McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group, they're the big strategic consulting firms. And the law degree from Yale doesn't hurt either, right?
I'd like to ask Lewis a question. Please submit via the Bizzabo app, and please join me in warmly welcoming Lewis to the stage.
Cool. Thank you for coming. As advocates, the question we're trying to answer is how we can do the most good for farm animals. And particularly in a space with such limited evidence, I think one of the most powerful forms of evidence we can look at is what has and hasn't worked recently. So in the last almost 4 years now, we've made over 160 grants, totaling almost $100 million on farm animal welfare. And today I'm going to share a couple of the lessons that we've learned in the process. So I'm going to share a couple of lessons there. First, around corporate reforms, what we've learned about securing them and implementing them. Secondly, about plant-based meat and the potential of the sector, the obstacles it faces. And then thirdly, about where money goes in the movement and also where the animals are that need helping. So the first lesson is around corporate campaigns. And the key takeaway here is that implementation is just as important, if not more so, than securing the initial pledges. But I'm going to go into a little bit of detail around that. And first, just to kind of give you some background to how we reached the point we're at today and where we are today. So the corporate campaigns went far faster than we expected. Back in late 2014, advocates started campaigning on cage-free reform, seeking to get companies to commit to transitioning away from battery cages in their supply chain by specific dates. What you can see here is a photo of some particularly cool activists from the Humane League. And this was kind of a common tactic of really presenting a company and its customers with the very stark choice of facing an aggressive ongoing campaign or making a commitment. This slide sort of tells the story of how these campaigns went. So what you see in the blue line is the progress on US cage-free. That's the number of millions of hens who will be cage-free.
US and pardon me. US in blue. Goodness me. Serves me right for eating Pringles on stream, I guess. I was sure that once I popped, I'd be able to stop. But alas. Just a quick moment of mogging for the UK here. Here you've got the US in blue and international in red. US mogging, right? Think again, pal. UK up to 72%. Don't even come at me.
That's the number of millions of hens who will be cage-free once these...
Oh yeah, thanks for asking, Andrew. This is something called Tab for a Cause. The idea is that every time you open up a new tab, it gives you an advert, which actually you can't see here. But here are the ads. and then that money goes to a cause area of your choice, which I have animal suffering, or ending animal suffering. Oh, it's the Humane League, so I guess it is an effective altruism organization, which is cool. Yeah, tab for a cause, that's called. I'll put the link in the chat here if anyone wants to check that out. Probably pretty marginal, but you know, this is their total amount raised, which is up to 2 million, over 2 million. So that's pretty cool.
These pledges are implemented. And in red, you see progress of international cage-free campaigns. And so what you see is prior to 2014, very few companies had made these pledges, only companies like Whole Foods. In 2015, as these campaigns stepped up, first the major food service companies, led by Sodexo, made these commitments. McDonald's then set off a flurry of activity amongst fast food companies in doing this. And then
True, Tristan.
Costco was the first major conventional retailer to come through. You then saw a kind of cascade effect across all the other retailers, including ultimately Walmart, the biggest. Globally, we've seen a similar phenomenon since these campaigns went global in 2016. Seen partial or complete global cage-free commitments coming from retailers like Tesco and Carrefour, food manufacturers like Nestle, Starbucks, and hospitality companies like Hilton. And initially, I think we thought the lesson was just that this had been really easy and it was kind of case closed. So as of 2016, the egg industry kind of conceded defeat. They said, you know, we realize the future's cage-free. Cages have no further role. We're going to get rid of our cages. It's going to take some time. It's going to cost $7 to $10 billion for them. But you saw all the major egg producers basically making public commitments that they were starting to build out cage-free. They recognized there was no future
Pro UPF streamer chokes to death on Pringles on stream.
for cages. In the last couple of years, though, that started to change. So we started seeing headlines like this one from the American Farm Bureau, where egg producers were saying, well, we're actually not seeing any of these companies buying cage-free eggs. So we're scaling back our cage-free transitions. We're not going to necessarily make them through. We saw a survey recently from the egg industry saying they don't think most hens will be cage-free by 2025. And so this is what's really produced the question of how do we ensure implementation of these pledges? So this is just kind of the state of where we're at currently. This graph shows million hens who are currently caged.
Oh, look at this. This is kind of fun because this goes up to where we now are. This is in 2019, the projection is in millions of hens. This is in percent of eggs, I guess. But it looks like it's going pretty well in the intervening years. This is the graph ending in 2019. And indeed, that trajectory has continued. No complaints. Little bit flat between 2021 and 2022. Wonder if there's any graphs with more recent data than this. I think it goes up to 2022. This from the Humane League says 45% of US hens are now free from cages. Oh look, and it has millions as well. So this is higher numbers than he's got in his slides, I think. Well, I guess it's there or thereabouts. But they're looking for 250 million by 2025. Did we make it? Not quite. About half that. But not bad either. So this had a 23% as of 2019, up to 45% by 2025. this is kind of a fun thing about watching old talks, I guess. You get to see whether the predictions or the aspirations were fulfilled. And I tell you, that is not bad at all. Look at that. Oh, we do have a graph here, look. Again, it's percent rather than number of hens, but looks like we have some more precise measurements in more recent years as well. But look at that. It's pretty freaking similar, right? The cage-free thing really is working. It was working in 2019 and is still working in 2025. So fair play to everyone who's cracking on with Fast Action Network. That's our contribution. That is really satisfying. Look at that. It's almost it's so similar.
Cage-free in the United States. That's the black line. And then the red line is the number who need to be cage-free for these pledges to be fulfilled completely on time. And what you can see here is we've had pretty substantial progress. So today, as of last month, about 67 million hens cage-free in the United States. That's more than 4 times as many hens as were cage-free before these campaigns started in 2014. Substantial progress. But
this is why so many of the campaigns now, by the way, are like this company backed out of their commitment, because we've just hit 2026. And a lot of these commitments said by 2025, largely just because it's a round number, right? So the number of hens is fewer than he has on his graph here, but the trajectory is very, very similar. You'd take that, wouldn't you? As long as it keeps on going. That's why we've got to keep pushing on this. And I'll tell you what as well. This doesn't need to go all the way to 100% to actually get to 100%, because in the UK, again, mogging the US, we got to, well, 72% as of a few years ago, and now we're looking at banning cages altogether. So once you get enough of the big players in the market on board with some new intervention like this, or some new policy like this, when they then go into their meetings with their industry groups and their lobbyists and government officials that they're talking to, the big companies who have already adopted cage-free, they're no longer lobbying against cage-free as a law. In fact, now they're probably lobbying for cage-free laws, because they're already doing this policy and they're getting undercut by their competitors who are not doing this policy. So it becomes in their interest to try and impose it on the whole market so as to even the playing field, right? So once you get to a majority, like now there's no majority of egg producers in the UK fighting for cage systems. And so it becomes much, much easier to pass it as law. So the US up to 45%, once you go past 50%, it gets a lot easier to talk about having this as law.
we still need to get to more than 250 million hens being cage-free, and that requires a quickening of the pace. So what can we do to ensure that this pace of conversion picks up to see that companies actually follow through on these pledges? The first thing we can do is legislation. So most of you are probably aware, last year, California passed a landmark ballot initiative banning not just cages in the state, but also the sale of eggs from caged hens as of 2022. And this is important not just for the direct impacts, potentially up to 40 million hens could be directly impacted, but also for the effect it has on corporate supply chains. Most national corporates operate in California, and so for at least that portion of their supply chain, they're going to have to start implementing on a sooner timeline. And that's something we think is critical, is getting companies to start implementing earlier, so they're not all waiting until 2025 to go 100% cage-free. The second thing we need is public reporting of progress. So this came out 2 months ago. McDonald's said they're a third of the way toward being cage-free. About 2 million hens are currently cage-free in the McDonald's supply chain, and that puts them perfectly on track to fulfill their pledge on time. Unfortunately, many companies are not yet publicly reporting their progress. They're not yet saying whether they've made any progress at all. And so this is something that advocates are going to need to put increasing pressure on, is getting companies to transparently report to their shareholders, to their customers, where they're at in fulfilling these public pledges. And the third thing we need is to get partial implementation progress. And so I mainly created this slide because I wanted to create a bubble chart. But what you can see on the left, the higher a company is, the more cage-free they are. So the further they've progressed on that. You can see on the bottom, on the x-axis, is how big a company they are, basically, how much of the market they have. And the size of the bubble represents how many hens are cage-free as a result of their progress to date. So we can see as well, McDonald's is impressive, 2 million hens. It's really dwarfed by the power of some of these retailers to affect major change. And in particular, I would point you to Costco, which is now at 89% cage-free. My estimate is that's about 8.3 million hens cage-free just in Costco's supply chain. Walmart, which is only 15% cage-free, just because of its massive size, already accounts for about 6 million hens.
It feels kind of weird to be counting the number of cage-free hens as the metric. Like percentage, fair enough. Or reducing the number of caged hens, fair enough. But if you're trying to maximize for the number of cage-free hens, I mean, one way of doing that would be to have more hens being farmed, which is not what we want. So it seems like a bit of a weird metric to use. Maybe there's a good reason for that, but yeah, percentage seems like the way that you'd want to go. Or number of caged hens, and then trying to reduce that, right, would be the ideal thing.
Cage-free. So just between those two retailers, that's about a quarter of the hens that are cage-free.
We don't have Walmart, Tristan, but we have Asda is the supermarket that's owned by Walmart. And that is, I'd say, probably like the third or fourth biggest supermarket in the UK. Our equivalent is Tesco, that's our big one, and then Sainsbury's is second. Sainsbury's is a close second. Then I would guess probably Asda third. Let's have a look actually. Biggest UK supermarkets. Oh, this says Asda bigger than Sainsbury's. Oh no, okay. Yeah, Tesco, then Sainsbury's, then Asda. Then Aldi, that's kind of surprising. Then Lidl. Alright, well basically it's Tesco and Sainsbury's and the rest, to be honest. Tesco mogging at more than twice its nearest rival, or almost twice its nearest rival. Ugh, Statista. I always want to look at stuff on Statista, but they really make it stingier with... I should be able to log into this, but they make it difficult to do somehow. I don't know.
Free in the US today, just due to two retailers. And so that really shows the importance, focusing on the biggest players in the room, focusing on the huge grocery chains that control the majority of where eggs go in America. So just recap the lessons there. I think one thing we're going to need to see more of a focus on is legislation to ensure that corporate pledges are enshrined into law. The second thing is going to be pushing companies to publicly report. And the third thing is seeking these milestones, saying it's not enough to just publicly report you're at 0%. You need to say we're going to get to 25% by this date. We're going to make particular progress on a time.
Seems like a good time actually to post the reminder to do the consultation for banning cages in the UK if you haven't already filled this out. This is due on March 9th. You don't need to live in the UK. You don't need to work for an animal org. This is for anyone to fill out. And you can copy paste the answers that I've put in this Google Doc. So if you haven't already submitted a consultation on the UK going cage free, now's your chance. And you know that those remaining egg producers that do use cages are going to be submitting responses here arguing for cages, so it's on us to make sure that this is going in the right direction. So yeah, check out the UK consultation and feel free to copy paste those answers if you haven't done so already. it's very close to a victory, but the consultation is, yeah, I'm always anxious about these things getting flooded by animal ag people.
Timeline. The second lesson I want to share today is around the growth of plant-based meat and the remaining challenges to the industry. So the main update here is that we've been really surprised at how quickly this field has grown. And so I think if you'd asked me what was going to be the most successful IPO in 2019, would definitely not have guessed it would be Beyond Meat. We're seeing a huge...
This is bittersweet watching from 2026, is it not? Well, that was going so well here in 2019. But I liked that Ethan Brown video that we watched yesterday, where he's saying the competition is getting so much more expensive and is so much less efficient that all we have to do is survive and we'll win in the long term. Because they do be surviving.
Excitement around that. Seeing last night we were able to have Impossible Whoppers. Also something I would not have predicted a couple of years ago. So we've seen a huge amount of growth. And to give you a sense of what that's coming off the back of, this chart shows meat alternatives as a category in terms of sales. And probably quite surprising to many of you will be that up until mid-2017, it was a stagnant category. So this was somewhere where we weren't seeing substantial sales growth. These products were kind of relegated to a particular section of the supermarket. You had brands like Morning.
Yeah, fuck, what happened in these couple of years? Because again, this is another graph which we sadly know what it looks like with a few more years of hindsight. But here in 2019, everyone was thinking like, fuck, we've made it, this is it. This is going to be, meat alternatives are just going to keep on growing and growing, and this is going to be it now. What happened here to cause this big takeoff? And what's happened in the years since that it's regressed? I'm really asking. I'm really asking.
Morningstar had been around a long time, weren't increasing their sales substantially. And it's only in the last 2 years that we've seen a major trend in this, a major change in this trend. And I think that's thanks to many factors, but particularly Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods coming out with new, more appealing products, and in particular doing a much better job of marketing those products and setting a much higher benchmark for other plant-based companies to meet. The challenge, however, is on the pricing. So what I've put together here is retail prices, average retail prices where possible, of each of these items in the United States. It's dollars per pound. And what you can see is that the products in red are the animal-based products, the products in green are...
It's quite tempting to have a look at what these are like now. This is dollars per pound. Beyond Meat price per pound USA. This is $7 to $8 per pound. That might be from Reddit. What do you get? You get a 4-pack of quarter pounders. How many ounces to the pound? I don't know about this. I'm not going to be able to find a good answer to this, am I? Like 10 for Beyond Impossible is cheaper. Oh, you get an 8-pack? $16 ounces to pounds. Thank you, Tristan. Beyond Meat price, USA. No, I don't want to know the stock price. What do I want? Beyond Meat price, Walmart. Is this even going to show me? Oh, okay. $0.64 to the ounce. Times 16 ounces to the pound. So yeah, about $10. Master Roach is bang on the money. Oh, interesting, they're competing like that. So they've gone down a little bit. What's the beef price per pound? Oh, they actually have this on St. Louis Fed website. Look at that, it's going up and up and up. Still lower, so this was $6.70 to the pound for ground beef. But it's going up and up and up. So here's Louis Bollard giving this talk in 2019. It's about between $3 and $4 to the pound. Is that the same as he has it? Yeah, it is. So this bar would be more like here now. And this bar is more like here now. So the gap is closing pretty nicely. The plant-based stuff's still more expensive, but the gap's closing pretty nicely. Plant-based got cheaper since then, and beef has got more expensive. If you're heading in the right direction, all you gotta do is keep on going. And ideally speed up, I guess.
The plant-based products, we're still quite a long way away from price competitiveness. So Morningstar Farms' chicken nuggets with a
Based, Tristan. He lives beyond nuggets every single lunch break at work. Plant-based meat every day. Yes. $80 for a 10-pack of Juicy Marbles filet steaks. Yeah, that's the good shit, hey. That's well, how much is one of them weigh, I guess? Juicy Marbles filet steaks. Then that's the expensive stuff here. Two of them for £8 in Waitrose. Well, let's go Tesco. Okay, two for £8 as well. Look, we have price per kilo in the UK. That's the civilized way. But this is £half for £8. Okay, I can see how that would be confusing. £half in weight for £8 in money. Yeah, so this is the expensive stuff here. You can get cheaper plant-based meat, but yeah, this is the good shit. Had to buy a second freezer. Nice.
cheapest item I could find. This is buying them in bulk from like a Walmart somewhere in Central California. And even there, they're only...
True, we do have Costco here. I got fucking 20-pack or whatever you get from Costco of Beyond Burgers once upon a time. Need to go to Costco again, actually. Costco's based as hell. I wonder what time it closes. I might go there today.
Slightly cheaper than bacon or steak, and still about 3 times the price of the average national composite of chicken prices. So although we've made a lot of progress, and although this sector is growing, we're still a long way away from being price competitive. And so in this chart, I've sought to break down what's holding us back from being price competitive. So I've taken here the cheapest plant-based meat I could find on the market, Morningstar chicken nuggets, and compared that to the average price of chicken nationally in the United States, and this is as of like last week. And what's really kind of astounding here is just how insanely cheap chicken is. So you see the USDA actually provides not just the overall retail price, but breaks it down on the wholesale side too. So you can see that producers are producing chicken for less than $1 per pound. And when you break down what the costs are there, it's almost entirely feed. So 30% of that is everything else except for feed. It's the labor, it's the barns, it's the chicks they have to buy. Almost nothing in the scheme of this price. And then the feed they're getting is incredibly cheap feed. And they're converting it, in the case of chickens, at about a 3x ratio from feed to usable meat. So contrary to kind of what many of us might think, that animal agriculture is inherently inefficient, this particular part of animal agriculture is pretty efficient. And I think something we often lose sight of with plant-based meat is it's one thing to compete with burgers, it's one thing to compete with red meat, it's a whole other thing to compete with this efficiency of the broiler chicken machine.
Let's have another look at that graph. There's a couple things here that really surprised me. One is the markup. I have heard, and I've kind of been working under the assumption, I guess, that the percentage markup on plant-based products is much higher than on meat. Which would make sense because there's a lower sales volume. And so you need to have a higher markup to justify the fact that you're going to sell fewer units, right? If you're selling chicken very quickly and selling lots of it and selling it almost as soon as you put it on the shelf, you can afford to take like 3% markup or less, right? Supermarkets really can beat that margin down. Whereas if you're selling plant-based stuff and it is not selling as quickly, in order to justify the shelf space, you're going to need to have a higher percentage markup. So the net value of markup is higher here, or the gross value, I guess. But as a percentage, it looks like they're saying it's more than 100% markup on the chicken, right? This is more than half of the total price is retail markup, whereas for the plant-based one, it's what that looks like, maybe 50% markup, like 1/3 of the price being from retail markup. So that's kind of surprising to me. And then, yeah, the feed making up most of the cost is in line with what I've heard. And this is why, if the cost of grain goes up, we might think, oh, well, that's going to put up the price of plant-based products, right? But it's going to put up the price of animal products a lot more, because you need more grain to produce an animal product than you do to produce a plant-based product. But the other thing that surprises me is that he said it's about 3x conversion from the feed to the chicken. I've heard 9x in terms of calories in, calories out. Maybe there's some variation depending on the system. Or maybe he's using a different metric than calories, I guess, but I'm not sure how else you would do it. Weight, maybe? But yeah, this kind of surprises me. Why would I would expect to see the markup here be like this, right? Like less than 10% of the wholesale price. The retailers are this doesn't really make sense intuitively, because you would have thought if there's competing retailers, they're going to compete this down for a very like commodity product. I wouldn't really back myself to be right and for Lewis Bollard to be wrong. That's the big that's the only thing that's given me a bit of pause here. If this was anyone else, I'd be like, nah, this is bollocks.
But breaks it down on the wholesale side too. So you can see that producers are producing chicken for less than $1 per pound. And when you break down what the costs are there, it's almost entirely feed. So 30% of that is everything else except for feed. It's the labor, it's the barns, it's the chicks they have to buy. Almost nothing in the scheme of this price. And then the feed they're getting is incredibly cheap feed.
Hey, Soy Daddy, welcome back. Did we lose you to Jake Lagatar's puppies? Is Jake Lagatar still going? He was killing us with the puppies earlier. I can't compete with that. He is still going. Oh, he's cooking now, not showing off his puppies. That's why there's a few more people in here. You know, I should bring my dog on stream. That'll get it going.
And they're converting it in the case of chickens at about a 3x ratio from feed to usable meat. So contrary to kind of what many of us might think that, you know, animal agriculture is inherently inefficient, this particular part of animal agriculture is pretty efficient.
Nice, Jason. Good. He's given me a chance at least.
And I think something we often lose sight of with plant-based meat is it's one thing to compete with burgers, it's one thing to compete with red meat, it's a whole other thing to compete with this efficiency of the broiler chicken machine. So a couple of lessons to take away from what we see in plant-based meats today. I think one is that the product actually matters. So seeing the growth that that Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat have brought to the market, whether that's taste or whether that's marketing. Second, chicken's going to be way harder than beef. So it's one thing to compete with beef. It's a totally different ballgame to compete with chicken, which is, of course, where the vast majority of animals are in the supply chain. And then the third thing is that the basic math of competing with chicken is we need to be able to convert feed into plant-based protein more efficiently than a broiler chicken does. A broiler chicken does it at about 3x into usable meat. And so we need to beat that ratio to be price competitive with chicken. The final lesson I want to share today is just around where money goes in the farm animal movement. So we've pulled together some new analysis, both of where the money goes, but also where the animals are, things we didn't really until recently have any good data on. So this chart shows my best estimate of where money goes in the farm animal movement currently. Now, these numbers might be a little bigger than what you've kind of seen previously. This is a pretty liberal interpretation of farm animal.
True, Tristan. You tried any of that Brave Robot ice cream? You can get some precision fermentation dairy already, which is pretty based. Wow, look at this. You know what? You got to hand it to the Australians. They really seem to punch above their weight when it comes to animal advocacy. Like 1/10 of the funding that you find in Europe. And I guess 1/18 of the funding that you have in North America. But they really seem to do a lot. Australia's biggest export at this point is Joey Carbstrong. So you got to hand it to the Aussies. I don't know what they're doing down there, but they really seem to punch above their weight when it comes to animal advocacy.
Animal advocacy. I'm including the budgets of groups like PETA, at least insofar as they're directed toward farm animal advocacy or veganism. So a lot of large organizations that you might not think of as the EA animal movement, but nonetheless are working on farm animals. So what you see here is that there's been a huge growth in the amount of money since just a couple of years ago. It would have been maybe a third of this amount of money involved. So a lot more money in the movement, but still overwhelmingly being spent.
Wait, what? A third, 2 years? Did he say? Did I hear that right?
Think of as the EA animal movement, but nonetheless are working on farm animals. So what you see here is that there's been a huge growth in the amount of money since just a couple of years ago. It would have been maybe a third of this amount of money involved. So
that's wild. Is that real? So that means it grew 200% in a couple of years. That doesn't seem like it can be, unless he's only talking about EA again. That does seem feasible. There's no way there was a third of the money a couple of years ago. Let me listen to it one more time.
What you've kind of seen previously. This is a pretty liberal interpretation of farm animal advocacy. I'm including the budgets of groups like PETA, at least insofar as they're directed toward farm animal advocacy or veganism. So a lot of large organizations that you might not think of as the EA animal movement, but nonetheless are working on farm animals. So what you see here is that there's been a huge growth in the amount of money since just a couple of years ago. It would have been maybe a third of this amount of money involved. So a lot more money in the movement.
What happened? What the hell happened? Can that be right? A tripling of the farmed animal advocacy budget in a couple of years. Can that be right? That doesn't seem feasible. Again, I would be much more confident in disagreeing if I wasn't talking about Lewis Bollard here. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what he said. That seems wild to me.
But still overwhelmingly being directed toward the United States and Western Europe. By contrast, this is our current analysis of how many land farm animals are alive at any point in time. And this is based on a new analysis by my colleague Persis Iskander, who went into all the underlying data from the FAO. And we think we have a better handle here than the FAO does on how many farm animals there are. So our best estimate is about 25 billion globally, alive at any point in time, land farm animals. Again, what you see is about 5.5 billion of those are in America and Western Europe. All of the rest are elsewhere, and predominantly in Asia. And then this shows where the farmed fish are. So this is also an analysis from Persis based on pulling together tonnage, and this is something we'll be sharing publicly soon. And the good news is we actually think there are a few fewer farmed fish alive at any point in time than we thought previously. We think there are about 55 billion farmed fish alive at any point in time now. But again, you see this huge imbalance between where the money is being spent and where the animals are. About 3 billion of those animals in the US and Western Europe, where the vast bulk of money is being spent. The vast majority in China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia.
Having just glazed South Asia for having lots of Buddhist and Hindus and wokeness with respect to animal issues, I guess that's where most of the animals are. Oh, this is only farmed fish. Do you do all animals? Land farm animals. Okay, they're a bit better on that, to be fair, considering how much of the population is here. Like, India has over 1 billion people. And there are fewer farmed land animals than North America. So that is pretty base then. That is kind of in line with what I said earlier. But not so for fish, huh? For farmed fish. There's a ton of them. Oof.
And the good news is we actually think there are a few fewer farmed fish alive at any point in time than we thought previously. We think there are about 55 billion farmed fish alive at any point in time now. But again, you see this huge imbalance between where the money is being spent and where the animals are. About 3 billion of those animals.
Hey, and I guess Lewis Bollard's an Aussie as well, right? So yeah, well, I don't know what's going on down there, but there's some good animal advocacy exports.
In the US and Western Europe, where the vast bulk of money is being spent, the vast majority in China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. So what can we take away from this? Well, I think the first thing is that money's growing in the movement, which is great. We're seeing a lot more money coming in. It's critical, still a lot less than we see in a lot of other movements, combating problems on a similar scale, but still an impressive scale of resources. Secondly, it's useful to know that there are about 25 billion land farm animals and about 55 billion farm fish. And third, that we should focus on Asia, and that we need to get more resources going into Asia. I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, there's a couple of the ACE charities, of course, focusing on Asia. We were looking the other day. The Good Food Fund and Synergia Animal. There's a lot of stuff in Asia as well. So there's a good amount of Asian-focused charities. You know what? Maybe you'd expect to see more, really. That's where the majority of, or I don't know if it was the majority, it was where a lot of the farmed animals are. And it's relatively underfunded still. So maybe you'd expect to see more Asian orgs on there. I was on mute the whole time. I was on mute when I was speaking then. Brilliant. I was just saying it's good that a couple of the ACE charities focus on Asia. Synergia and the Good Food Fund. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lewis. Lots of food for thought. Sorry. Yeah, so a few questions that I had initially. So it seems like, yeah, we thought the campaigns were a great success, and actually it was a bit more complicated than that. On that point, the ballot in California seemed to have made a big difference. Has that made you think about pushing more funding towards getting things on the ballot?
Yeah, so we're certainly thinking about potential ballot measures, and I know a lot of advocacy groups are thinking about that. There are constraints on the ballot measure as a form of advocacy. So only 24 states allow ballot measures in the relevant form that we want, where they can be initiated by citizens. And of those states, many are huge ag states where we don't face much of a prospect of winning. So there are definitely more states where we could still win ballot measures. Ballot measures are expensive, and so there's always a question of whether it's worth bringing those or whether things could be achieved by other means. But it's definitely on the table.
Did not know that. Only 24 states are now citizen-initiated ballots. That's interesting to know. We're doing a thing which includes measures of ballots at the moment. It's a bit of a... I can't say too much about it. I would love to share that because it has some awesome graphs that we could talk about, but we've found some evidence of increasing support for pro-animal ballots over the last 10 years. There aren't that many ballots, so it's like reasonable to count them up and just graph them. There's only like a few dozen. And yeah, there's a site called Ballotpedia which gives you all the data about them, when they were, where they were, how many people voted yes. And when you identify the ones which are like pro-animal ballots, the percentage of people voting yes seems to be going up over time, which is a good sign.
Great, and then I mean you kind of addressed that in your last slide about focus outside of the US and Western Europe. What is the state of campaigns?
Oh, really, Tristan? You can't find Brave Robot anymore? That's a bummer.
Campaigns and awareness and advocacy outside of US and Western Europe?
Yeah, I think we're at a much better point than we were a few years ago on this score. We're seeing a lot of exciting advocacy going on, for instance, in China and India. In India right now, there's a national moratorium on battery cages, new battery cages being installed, thanks to advocacy there of animal advocates in the courts. It'll probably be undone by the government, but it's still a sign of, I think, the strength of the movement there. And I think we're seeing that too across Southeast Asia. There are a lot.
I think that was maybe pessimistic in retrospect, right?
It'll probably new battery cages being installed. Thanks. India right now, there's a national moratorium on battery cages, new battery cages being installed, thanks to advocacy there of animal advocates in the courts. It'll probably be undone by the government.
Okay, he's talking about India. Never mind.
But it's still a sign of, I think, the strength of the movement there. And I think we're seeing that too across Southeast Asia. There are a lot of groups we're now seeing that were, one volunteer as of a few years ago. Now maybe are 1 or 2 staff members. And I think that's a really exciting.
India moratorium on battery cages. We'll see if it did get undone. May 6 acknowledges 2017 deadline to phase them out. Over 80% of India's eggs still come from caged hens. Okay. Okay.
Trend for people who want to support groups or want to get involved with them to see if we can build up that movement further.
Yeah. And then kind of switching to the meat alternatives, in terms of that price comparison and efficiency, I guess one question was, what is the 3x? Is that like difference in calories?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So the 3x is just by weight of grain to weight of meat. Depends.
It was weight. All right, good. I was wondering, but then Yeah, 9x is the figure I had in mind for calories. Let's see if he mentions that.
That's how you define it. Calories, protein, each produce a slightly different ratio, but it's still on the same kind of ballpark.
Okay, and I mean, yeah, and that seems like a very difficult kind of threshold to overcome. Do you have any broad sense of timelines of when that might become price competitive?
I don't know. I think you'd be better asking someone in plant-based meat.
Yeah.
I think that there's obviously a ton of innovation going on there, and also a ton of private sector money going into the space. And I think the one thing I'd say is the importance of directing that at particularly price competitiveness, not just at the kind of big brands. And so companies like Rebellious Foods, who are focusing on making chicken or chicken alternatives substantially cheaper, I think is one of the most exciting things going on in the space.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then some questions from our
Are they still around? That was an ex-GFI person, I think, right? Rebellious Foods. Looks like they are still around. Nice. Okay, well that's good. A lot of these things are going in the right direction then. We saw the price of Beyond Burger seems to have come down since then. The price of beef has gone up since then, so that gap's closing. And Lewis's pick for promising company to compete with chicken seems to be that it's still going.
audience. So how much room is there for getting more of our supporters to organise around new initiatives?
I think there's hopefully a lot of room for that. I mean, I think, at least amongst EA animal advocates, I think there's a really exciting desire to kind of do new things and to work out what the most effective way to do things is. And I think we see that across the animal movement in general. The movement has changed tremendously from where it was 5 years ago. Even the focus on corporate campaigns, the focus on international work. So I think there's a lot of excitement about doing new things.
Yeah. And then I'm not sure if this is the question, I'm not sure if the statement within it is true, but since fish account for circa 99% of the animals killed for food, how much time and resource should we direct towards fish advocacy?
Yeah, so the statement is true in the sense that if you include wild caught fish, and if you just look at vertebrates, then farmed fish do account for about 99% or more of animals killed for food. I think we should have a lot more focus on fish than we do currently. Obviously, it's a harder thing to motivate people on.
Is that right? 99% of animals killed for food?
99% or more. Look at vertebrates.
We direct towards fish advocacy.
Yeah, so the statement is true in the sense that if you include wild caught fish, and if you just look at vertebrates, then farmed fish do account for about 99% or more of animals killed for food. I think we should.
Okay, it's a couple of important caveats there, I guess. We were looking at the farmed fish numbers earlier. Hey, Rebecca, how'd you go? I have not looked at that yet, but I will have a look. So your issue was that you couldn't find where those numbers were coming from, is that right? You might be pretty close to a primary source, honestly, if it's talking... Well, I haven't looked at it, so I don't want to speculate too much, but yeah, if it's talking about like numbers of chickens affected by cage-free commitments and stuff like that, it's probably calculated like almost directly by Humane League or other orgs working on this. So I don't know if there'll be another citation to follow there.
We should have a lot more focus on fish than we do currently. Obviously, it's a harder thing to motivate people on. It's a harder thing to mobilize supporters on. But I also think ultimately a huge...
But we have just been looking at graphs about how much the proportion of cage-free eggs has increased. So there's definitely... This is the data source is confidential. Yeah, I mean, we have just been looking at these graphs of how much the portion of cage-free eggs has gone up. So this is definitely a thing that's happening.
Portion of our success is going to be governed by whether we make progress on fish or not.
Okay, great. And in terms of that kind of change in focus, how much collaboration discussion is...
Oh, true, Jason. Yeah, it's probably also counting fish as feed, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
there within the movement, and do you think we need more collaboration? I mean, unlikely that we need less, I guess. But,
yeah, I mean, I think collaboration is always good where possible. I think that groups do work well together, and I don't think we want to impose on everyone that they need to all be doing the same thing. I think there's actually a lot of value to diversity of approaches in the movement. So in that sense, I think there can be value to less collaboration.
Okay.
I think it's good, certainly within the EA portion of the animal movement. I think people work together very well, and hopefully that's a trend we can continue.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, so what grants have opened for?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, Rebecca. Earlier he was talking about 2014 as the time when these campaigns became mainstream in America, I guess. So this is pretty near the start of the increasing curve. And then the laws are also going to be a result of campaigning to a large extent, right? We were just talking about, I guess, before you joined, when you get to a high enough percentage of cage-free eggs, that then it becomes in the producer's interest to actually lobby for that to be law as well.
Feel made in terms of that community organizations and clean meat?
Yeah, so on the clean meat side, we haven't made any grants, but we have been funding a chemical engineering consultant contractor who's been looking into the question and is going to hopefully publish a paper on this later this year, and that will kind of inform our funding going forward. On the movement building, community building side, most of the work we've been doing there has been outside of the US and Western Europe, trying to help build the movement in other countries. So things like the Federation.
You do also have a decent amount of, JC Reese was saying yesterday, a decent amount of direct evidence where the companies are literally like, okay, we're now going to implement this cage-free egg policy due to this campaign, or sometimes cooperation, right? They do like good cop first, try and get them to go cage-free, and then if they don't, that's when they do the campaigns on Fast Action Network and so on. But often those companies will say, this is a result of working with the Humane League or whatever.
Of Indian animal protection organizations, which combines over 100 grassroots groups, and we've been funding them to hold workshops to help do movement building in India.
Okay, great. And you mentioned Rebellious Foods. So one question saying that they've heard Rebellious Foods, formerly Seattle Food Tech, invested in new industrial equipment for extracting protein from plants. Are there other ways to try to reduce the cost of chicken alternatives? I'm not sure how in the weeds you are with that. But.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm not technically up to date on the ways we could reduce the price of plant-based chicken. But I do think that just having a greater focus on that end of the market, I think understandably, a lot of the companies that conventional investors are most excited about are companies aiming for the top end of the market, because there's a bigger profit margin there. And so I think somewhere where EAs or people who want to be impact investors can maybe have some impact is in focusing on the bottom end of the market and trying to compete.
This is very true, and actually this is another good bit of hopium. Anyone for hopium? So we were looking at earlier at the UK supermarkets, and Lidl was it third or fourth? Like fifth. The fifth biggest supermarket with about 8.3% market share. Now, as much chat as there has been about plant-based meat brands struggling, Lidl's own brand range, which by the way, this is a discount supermarket, so this is like their own brand of a cheap supermarket. This is like near enough the cheapest plant-based stuff that you can get. And they report a 700% increase in plant-based sales between, is it 2019 and 2025? I can't see when they set this target. But yeah, massive increase. So as much as there has been concern about plant-based meat brands, which tend to be relatively expensive, not doing as well as they used to, you're not really going to necessarily hear, apart from instances like this, about how the supermarket's own brands are doing. And I have to admit, I buy a lot of supermarket own brand plant-based meat just because it's cheaper. It's like the cheapest stuff that you can get, right? Cheaper than Beyond Meat or whatever other brands that you might like. They're not necessarily going to shout about that. No, they did in this case. And by the way, there's another good example of what I was saying about companies' lobbying incentives changing. Because Lidl is now lobbying for minimum targets for protein from plant-based sources for UK supermarkets. Now, why are they doing that? They're lobbying for like some law that's going to restrict them and affect them. Well, they're doing it because they're already doing well on that metric. So if they can introduce that as law for the rest of the market, it's like saying to the other supermarkets, like, you better keep up with us, guys. So there's a couple of cool things going on here. One is the big increase in plant-based meat sales in supermarket-owned brands, which is pretty offsetting a lot of the struggling amongst the more expensive brands. And the other is this thing about when supermarkets go towards particularly plant-friendly outcomes, they then become in favor of that becoming the law, much like with the cage-free thing as well.
Much more on price than we are currently.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then why did you choose cage-free campaigns and plant-based meats as topic for this talk versus other interventions? Are they the kind of things that you've been spending most time on?
No, actually, I had a list of about like 15 lessons learned, and you get to meet with a speaker coach before this, and she told me that it was awful, and I needed to just focus on 3 things. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and you sort of mentioned persistence in your talk.
Yeah.
How much are you kind of growing?
So there are 12 lessons here that we missed out on due to that advice. I'd like to see the extended version of this talk.
The team at Openfill, or are you kind of, where are you at with that now?
Yeah, so yeah, Persis joined us in the last year. She's here, if you want to say hi to her. Yeah, she deserves a round of applause. Yeah, so we now have a team of 3 on farm animal welfare, and I doubt we're going to expand it much beyond that in the foreseeable future. But you know, one thing I am really excited about is there are a lot more EA animal research organizations coming up. So Rethink Priorities would be an example. And I think a lot of that kind of capacity in answering questions,
Right, research.
Also helps us do our job well.
Yeah. Great. Let me just see if there's any more that have come through. So it seems like a lot of people you're speaking to are American. How do Americans address animal suffering in Asia without having the kind of potential cultural conflicts that you might expect?
Yeah, I think that's
I kind of hate this question. He's about to say it's a really good question. I kind of hate this question. I mean, I think there is a practical part of this question which is valid. Like, you probably need to have a Chinese speaker, for example, if you're going to try and do stuff in China. But there's a part of this question which is like very 2019 era, like misguided wokeness almost. Right, whereas like we shouldn't be imposing Western values kind of vibe. I think that any like implied colonialism or whatever, however you would want to frame it, I think is way lower down the list of concerns than millions and millions and billions of animals in cages and on factory farms. Like, I would be quite happy to be imposing my values on any other culture if it meant getting animals out of factory farms and slaughterhouses. I really don't. I mean, look, again, there's kind of 2 ways that this question might have been asked, right? There's a practical element of it. You need to have someone who knows about the culture. You need to have someone who knows the language and so on. Someone who maybe has links with the government in given countries, right? But to the extent that this question was framed as, like cultural imperialism colonial, like imposing of Western ethics or whatever. I kind of hate that. Aims with Western question mark. Yeah, true. This is also not a Western value, right? In fact, I've just been glazing Eastern cultures for being relatively woke on animal issues. So yeah, it's not clear that it's like a Western value in any case, but yeah, there is definitely a practical element. Again, you probably do want somebody from the country, just for the language, if nothing else, and for the cultural knowledge and so on. But yeah, I don't think that there's any valid moral concern with, like, what about these white Westerners saying that you can't have cages in like any country, basically.
Real challenge. I think there are a lot of people who want to do things to help in Asia, but our American.
Okay, he said real challenge, not really good question. So that's good.
Maybe don't have a ton of context in the region, and so I think one of the things we can do is just try and direct more funding toward advocates who are in those countries. Another thing I think is a number of international organizations, as they've expanded, have recruited in those countries. So oftentimes the international organization can bring the framework, the administrative side, perhaps experience of what worked in one part of the world, and then can hire locally to bring people there who can sort of do things better. Yeah,
and the funding, right? The money. If you can take the money from American animal orgs, where we've seen, like, had the graph, like most of the budget is in North America, and spend that money in South America or in Asia or in Africa, then yeah, it's going to go a lot further. But yeah, I discourage anyone from being like, we can't do cage-free campaigns in Asia because it's cultural imperialism or something like that.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Please join me in thanking Lewis for his time today.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
Well, that was good. As we kind of knew that it would be. Again, Lewis Bollard, very smart guy. There's a few things in there that surprised me. I certainly wouldn't bet any amount of money that Lewis is wrong about this stuff, honestly. So, yeah, maybe those are points that I'll have to revisit. The retail markup thing, that was very surprising to me. The tripling of the budget in a few years, that was also very surprising to me. I feel like I must have had the context wrong for that. I don't know. But anyway, some hopium for you. Anyways, a lot of the trends that he was talking about have continued. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there for today, guys. We did nearly 2 hours. We watched a couple of effective animal advocacy speeches. See if there's anything new on Fast Action Network before I sign off. Well, nothing new. They can't keep up with us. They literally can't produce actions fast enough for the Vegan 2.0 movement. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. We'll leave it there. You can go see Jake's puppies now. I appreciate you joining me, especially when there was such good content on the other side. So yeah, thanks for joining. Appreciate you, Tristan. Appreciate you, Jason. Nice to see you, Master Roach. Nice to see you, Rebecca. And I'll see you guys next stream. Take it easy. Cheers.